In this video, I'm going to give you 5 secrets to improving jazz piano improvisation. Hey, it's Paul Tobey here from Jazzmentl.com. Thank you for joining me for another one of my tutorials. If you really want to be a better improviser, then I suggest you stick around right to the end because I'm going to share the benefit of my experience in how I became a better improviser. Number 1, jazz standards. Learn them, memorize them, and internalize them. For example, let's say you go to a jam session or you go to a gig and somebody calls Autumn Leaves in B flat. You should know this standard because the audience knows it and everyone on the stage knows this tune. So again, it's just one of those things that you need to learn, memorize, and internalize. For example, like I said, somebody calls it in B flat, you should be able to sit down and do this. Now, it's not just Autumn Leaves, of course, there are a lot of standards that you should know. I do have another video on this channel that's all about the 5 jazz standards that every jazz pianist should know, and there's a free download there to actually download the lead sheets like the one you see on the screen for Autumn Leaves. Let me post a link to that video up here in the corner. The second way to improve your jazz piano improvisation is to develop strong chord voicings. The best way to do that is to figure out patterns that work for different chord progressions. For example, have you ever heard of something called drop 2 voicings? Let's work on that for a second and then we'll do drop 2 and 4. So a drop 2 voicing is to basically take a chord that is in root position. This is a C minor 7th chord. Take the second note from the top, drop 2, down an octave. So the second note from the top, which is the G, drop it down an octave, play that with your other hand. So this is a good chord voicing for C minor 7. It says that it's an E flat major 6 over G, but we know it's a C minor 7 in root position. And the sound is a little bit different. Now, if we were to do some type of cycle of fifths, in other words, diatonic cycle of fifths for that, we could work out a way to make our voicing sound interesting just using drop 2. Let's move up to D minor just to do all white notes to make it easier. Here's D minor 7, drop the second note from the top, down an octave, play it with the left hand. And then all you need to do to move around the cycle of fifths is to go to G7, and the way to do that is to move the bottom note and the top note down 1 note, and that's G7. So all we did was kept the middle 2 notes the same and moved the top note and the bottom note down. Then change the middle 2 notes down to here, and you get a C major 7. So that's a 2-5-1 in C major 7. And if you kept doing that, you could go around the diatonic cycle of fifths. See how that works? Now, the other voicing that I want to show you is a drop 2, drop 4 voicing. So if we kept that D minor 7 here and we dropped 2 down to here and 4, which is the root, down to here, you get this voicing. Still D minor 7, it's just spaced differently. And then all you need to do is change 1 note at a time. The top note of each hand goes down, then the bottom note of each hand goes down. Kind of cool, right? Now, if we were to apply that to a tune like Autumn Leaves, we would start with our C minor 7th chord. Look at A section on your sheet music. There's C minor 7, drop 2 down here, and drop 4 down here. And let's do 2-5, drop the top 2 notes of each hand. There's our F7 chord, and then the bottom 2 notes. There's B flat major 7, then drop the top 2 notes to make E flat major 7. Then the bottom 2 notes to A minor 7 flat 5, then the top 2 notes to D7, and then the bottom 2 notes to G minor. So now we've made some strong voicings for the progression to the first part of Autumn Leaves. And if we were to add rhythms to that, it might sound something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's how you develop strong chord voicings. You basically take a pattern and you start applying it to a jazz standard like Autumn Leaves. Okay, let's move on to number 3, and that is working on scales and modes. Now, you might have heard of modes before. That's when you're talking about Dorian and Mixolydian and Aeolian and all of that. But basically, modes can apply to any scale, like a straight major scale in C7. That's a mode. You don't necessarily need to know what it's called. If you move it up a note diatonically, you get D minor, then E minor. These are all modes. Just learn each mode diatonically starting on a different note of the scale. What's more valuable is to start thinking about what we call bebop scales. Now, the reason why bebop scales work well versus straight modes is because there's 8 notes to the scale instead of 7. Let's take D minor, for example. If we were doing a 2-5-1 of C minor, remember this? So that's D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7. Now, if we were to take the bebop scale for each of those chords, you'd basically get this. You've got an F sharp as a passing note. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then back to 1. And that's why it's great, because it evens out the bar, makes it easier to improvise. For example, right? Making up little lines that sound great within the context of that chord and that scale. Then if you move on to G7, you get this scale. The F sharp is the passing note. Same as in D minor 7, it just appears in a different place. Then C major 7, it has a different passing note, and that is the G sharp or A flat. So all 3 scales and then what you want to do is start to put those together in some type of pattern. So for example, where the one leaves off, start the next scale. Okay, I'm just playing up the scale and picking up the scale where the other one left off and making little patterns there at the end. Now, in the context of a tune like Autumn Leaves, what you want to do is start playing bebop scales over each of those chords as well. So C minor 7, F7, B flat, to E flat, to A minor 7 flat 5. A minor 7 flat 5 is going to be a little trickier because it's approaching a D7 chord. So you have to start thinking about what is the next chord and make the most appropriate scale possible. So this is your bebop scale. And then D7. And because the D7 then leads to a G minor 7, in other words, a 2-5-1 of minor key, you get something different than the major bebop scale, which would be this. Instead of that, you get this. Now, the passing note for each of those scales can vary a little bit. The ear is not necessarily going to discern the difference. It just makes it an 8-note scale versus a 7-note scale. And then once you get those bebop scales down for that progression, which is basically 2-5-1 of B flat, then 2-5-1 of G minor, you want to be able to play patterns using those bebop scales, like this. All I'm doing is pulling notes directly out of the bebop scale. So that's our number 3. Really work on our scales and modes. That's where soloing comes from. Now, obviously, some of the patterns that you're going to play, there's some bebop language in there, but that will come later. What you really want to do is get those scales underneath your fingers, and that's going to make you a much better improviser. Okay, let's say you've got a bunch of jazz standards underneath your fingers, you've worked on your chord voicings and your scales and modes, then you move on to number 4, and this is really going to kick your improvising skills into high gear, and that is to transcribe and analyze solos. What you want to do is find a piano solo that you really like and just transcribe a chorus. You're going to have to write it out and then basically learn it. But don't just learn it, analyze what's really happening in it. Let me play you a quick solo over the A section to Autumn Leaves, and then you can transcribe that. It's going to be easy for you to do this because, of course, we have chordy playing. For example, if you see me play this in the left hand, you'll know that you can write that down on a sheet of music because it's showing you that it's a C7/4 chord. So take that solo, transcribe it, analyze it a bit. There are some things in there that I played that are definitely worth learning. And as you transcribe and start learning solos like the one I just played, you got to start thinking about number 5, which is interesting rhythmic phrasing. Before we move on to number 5, I just wanted to let you know that if you like what you're hearing here and you'd like to learn more about it, you can join our private masterclasses. They're called Jazz Piano Mastery. I'm going to put a link up here in the corner to those courses. It is a small but mighty group who work together on Zoom. You can perform for me, get some feedback. We give you downloadable sheet music and some instructions to go along with that. In these lessons, you basically work on them, come back to the next masterclass, and we all share what we've learned. And you can play for me, like I said, and get some constructive feedback. They're great. It's probably the best value on the internet as you get to work live with me, and we can really get your playing to a new level pretty quickly. So check that out. If you have any questions, you can certainly contact us here through YouTube. Now, the thing about rhythm is you don't want to just always play eighth notes. You want to play little patterns of eighth notes in these clusters of eighth notes and 16th notes and triplets that make some type of rhythmic sense. And repetition of rhythmic ideas is one of the more advanced concepts of becoming a better improviser. For example, let's take a simple riff on C minor 7 and then move that to other chords like F7, down to B flat, down to E flat. So you're just taking a simple rhythmic idea and you're moving it through different chords. Let's get a little more complex. Okay? Take that idea and move it to other chords. Again. Now you can get really sophisticated with your rhythmic ideas and make them longer. In fact, the longer the rhythmic idea is, the harder it is to move it to the next phrase. Let's try something. So what I'm doing there is trying to play the same phrase with the same rhythmic pattern, just transcribing it into whatever the key of the moment is or whatever progression you're working on. So that's going from 2-5-1 of B flat into 2-5-1 of G minor, just taking the same idea and moving it into those new chords. Well, we've definitely talked a lot about Autumn Leaves in this video. Of course, there are many jazz standards you could learn, but since we focused on it, it seems only fitting that I give you the downloadable sheet music, which is the lead sheet you're looking at on your screen right now. Let me put that link up here in the corner. All right, I hope you've enjoyed these 5 ways to improve your jazz piano improvisation. My name is Paul Tobey. I hope you had a good time. If you could just reach down, hit the little thumbs up button. It really helps us here on the channel. And if you'd like to subscribe, we'd love to have you. And if you want some specific advice on how to use bebop scales in your improvisation, I suggest you check out this video next.